Hello, class. Welcome back from spring break. We're working on Chapter 10, Partner Violence, this week. So culture has a definite role in the definition of partner violence. Depending on where you live in the world, there's even, debate about what it is and who's involved in it, and whether it's a crime or not, depending on where you live. So we're going to look at the fact that it's also not limited to a husband and wife relationship this week. And some of the common terms that we're going to discuss are battering, which is physical violence perpetrated by one person on another; abuse, which is more of a general term that describes the unequal power relationship within which the assault occurs; assault, which is verbal and behavioral threats to other people, pets, or property; domestic violence is any act of assault by a social partner, a relative, and it's regardless of marital status. So it's very interesting when you look at the history of how spouse beating in the Western society began, and it goes as far back as patriarchy itself. The case of Bradley versus the state of Mississippi in 1827 basically was that there was a common law in the United States that acknowledged the right of a man to chastise his wife for misbehavior without being prosecuted for doing so. And this law, the law's attitude towards wife beating to the current day, is aptly summarized under the state of North Carolina and versus Oliver. The court ruled that if no permanent injury had been inflicted, it is better to draw the curtains, shut out the public eye, and leave the parties to forgive and forget. The implications of such blind justice are truly ominous. Domestic disturbance calls are far outnumber any other types of calls in which police respond or paramedics. I think you'll see that these statistics are shocking. I don't need to read them to you, but the other implication is for children who live in families where violence has occurred. About 7 million have witnessed severe violence. So there's trauma that is associated with watching your parents beat each other up. So these are some of the emerging approaches that took place for partner violence. The Scream Quietly or The Neighbors Will Hear You in 1974 was responsible. It was a book, and it was responsible for the start of the first women's shelter in England. The National Organization for Women in Massachusetts Coalition of Battered Women's Services group kind of happened subsequently and has become a forefront in developing funding sources, shelters, support groups, organizations, and training manuals and legislation. So it's kind of increasing public awareness through the feminist movement and citizens groups. And the domestic violence Duluth model has become internationally known because of its massive effort to get every agency that comes in contact with battering incidences, from the 911 dispatch that received the first call to the last judge. More of the idea that this intervention for survivors would be more systematic and integrated, so that no battered person or batterer falls through the cracks. I certainly don't have time in our little video here to go through all the different theories of why domestic violence takes place. You'll see all of these. And then below Stockholm Syndrome, I don't know why it's cut off on our slide, is the systems theory. And you'll find these in your textbook, so I would just encourage you to go through them. Some of these are all give reasons or explanations for why domestic violence occurs in our society. So it's important to understand that both parties in a battering situation can have certain identifiable characteristics, and we should clearly understand that these are not separate individual ingredients, but kind of a complex force that is interrelated to one another, and then those interrelated factors kind of increase the odds of interpersonal violence. There's an in-depth examination by a researcher called Bornstein in 2006 that looks at how emotional dependency in males and economic dependency in females, when combined, can become an extremely dangerous mix that can lead to violence. Men in battering relationships actually on page 304, it kind of lays out 10 factors for men in a battering relationship and 10 factors for women. So I would encourage you to pause right here and kind of, before you go on with this, read through those factors. They're eye-opening, really. And then it looks into the stressors, which are the rest of what's on this slide. So geographic isolation, sometimes victims have no friends nearby that can provide them support. Social isolation, their needs are supposed to be met only by their partner. Economic stress, medical problems, inadequate parenting skills, pregnancy, family dysfunction, alcohol and drug abuse, educational disparity, age, disenfranchisement, and rejection. As far as age is concerned, approximately 20% of the men in the age range between 18 to 25 and 17% of men in the age range 26 to 35 have committed at least one act of violence in the past year. So that's an important thing to look at. Again, the slide cuts off. You see rejection, and then underneath, the threat to masculinity is what it should say. On page 307 in your text, you'll look at the profile of batterers. I found this fascinating the first time I read this textbook. These 4 different types of batterers really look at, and it's defined in your text, so I'm going to let you just read it, but really look at the different types of batterers. To me, it's so interesting to think about, first of all, the first type, family-only batterers, because think about people who go out into society, hold jobs, have positions of authority, and never act out antisocially in their jobs or in the society. But when they get home, they can become super violent and controlling. And so how is it that they're able to control themselves in public but not at home? So, and what are the factors that influence that? To me, that's very interesting. So go ahead and read through that on page 307, and then you'll see the phases of violence also on 307 and 308. There are a lot of myths about battering. There's actually 15 of them in your text. So battered women overstate the case, they provoke the beating, they're masochists, battering is a family private matter, alcohol abuse is the prime reason for spousal abuse, battering only occurs in problem families, only low-income families and working-class families experience violence. These are all myths for so many reasons, and again, read through those in your text. Additional myths, the battering cannot be that bad or the victim would leave. Husband has patriarchal rights. The beaten spouse exaggerates the problems to exact revenge. Women are too sensitive, especially when they are pregnant. Battering is rare. Battering is confined to mentally ill people. Violence and love cannot coexist. Elder abuse between partners is neither prevalent or dangerous. So you can just see for a variety of reasons why these would be myths. You know, there's a lot of realities for abused women that people don't know when they ask the question, why wouldn't she leave? And I don't remember what the video is for this week. I haven't looked at it yet, but there's a great video, a great TED Talk called Why Does She Stay? Or something like that. And a woman named Leslie Steiner gives the TED Talk, and I'll try to put it under your lesson if it's not there. And she talks about the reality of being an abused woman. You know, women are oftentimes in a lot more danger in the period right when they leave than they are just staying in the abused home. And women have a sense of that if they're being abused. You know, she really is dependent on this relationship that she's in for everything. And there is a feeling of love. So it's this idea that there is something about the relationship that she doesn't want to leave. But it is very complicated, and there is a lot of, especially economic, reprisal for women who leave. Some of the other reasons why abused women have a hard time is religious values that strongly discourage separation or divorce. I can't say enough. Churches seem to have come around, but there are still so many damaging views about divorce, and women should stay and work it out, and there's a lot of blame of the woman if there's violence, and you know, they must have done something to cause it is the myth. This I don't know why this got cut off. It says, love and sorrow at the mate's professed inability to exist without her may compel her to stay. And then there's a couple more bullets that say, because of previous negative experiences with the authorities, she may believe she has no options. And then another one, due to language barriers, she may be unable to communicate her abuse. Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the most dangerous things the victim can do. When you look at personality measures given to women who've been victims, there's really no clear, necessarily set of attributes. One set of researchers, Hodeling and Sugarman in 1986, found only one characteristic, having witnessed or been victim to personal violence as a child, as a consistent characteristic for the women that they interviewed. Out of 699 women who participated in the first national violence study, the researcher could not even find that characteristic. So that appears there's little evidence that there is any consistent predisposing factors that predict who will and who will not become a victim of abuse. The Attitude Towards Women scale measures the traditionality of a woman's attitude about her role as well as her perception of significant others' views of women. Lenore Walker, found that battered women's viewed their father's perception of a woman's role much more traditionally than did non-battered control groups. And then there's a battered woman scale, and it's used to measure traits that arise as a result of experience in battering relationships. Overall, battered women present many of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress and can be placed for diagnostic purposes within that category. Okay, so there's lots of different assessment tools to look for that. And when you go to your doctor's office, almost every single doctor now asks, are you safe at home, or do you feel threatened at home? And then, of course, the most important components of intervention are all of the things that we've talked about throughout this entire course. So there are domestic violence shelters for women. If you think about, we're only talking about women as victims of domestic violence, but like I said, men can be victims of domestic violence. Children who are in the home with the family can also be victims of domestic violence. Like we said earlier, about 7 million children live in homes where there is domestic violence. They are still victims of that violence, whether they are hit or not. They experience the psychological trauma. Some of them are even removed from their homes as a result of the domestic violence taking place in their homes. Victims can oftentimes relapse and reunite with their abuser. I once heard at a workshop that on average, a woman will return to her relationship about 8 times before she finally stops being in that relationship with that person. So it can be a long time of trying to separate from the abuser. And going to a shelter without any follow-up can increase violence. So it's really important that as social workers, we are very in tune with following up with our clients. It's very stressful for children who live in a home with domestic violence. There are many treatment goals. We want to try to create an alliance with the parent, provide psychosocial education to both the parent and the child on what they've gone through, restore the parent's self-esteem and confidence, establish a safe environment for the child to express their thoughts and feelings, relieve the child's symptoms, including any difficulties with living transitions, sleep nightmares, and other trauma symptoms. Reestablish the child's previous level of cognitive functioning and attachment with the caregiver. Reassure that what's happened is not the child's fault and help the child to gain emotional regulation. Also provide stress reduction strategies. Courtship violence. This is dating violence. Basically, violence can occur in approximately about 25% of dating relationships. Number of dating partners and dating frequencies have the highest positive correlation to courtship violence. So the more people you date, the higher the likelihood that you could experience dating violence. It's funny, the grade point average has the highest negative correlation. In other words, so you would also expect adolescents who come out of a violent family can kind of carry those behaviors and experiences into their dating behavior. They found that family of origin violence is a risk factor in dating and aggression. So females who had been victimized by either parent were at a greater risk for re-victimization, but not increased aggression. High-risk males reported being aggressive towards females, particularly if they had been harshly disciplined by their fathers. For both males and females, but particularly for girls, the extent of their aggression toward their parents predicted their aggression towards their partners. So that's really an important thing to think about. This is a really good section in your book, and I'm actually not going to... I just went through it, and I just spent about 5 minutes, but I think it's too long for the video. So, on page 326, 327, and 328, please read closely some of the factors, the prevalence of violence, and some of the interventions that are common in helping people who are experiencing gay or lesbian violence. Treating batterers. Probably besides child abusers, domestic violence batterers are probably second on the list of people that nobody wants to work with. But the problem is there are so many people, and if we don't treat them, they'll just continue to batter. So it's really important to look at 329, 330, 331 and understand some of the different models. How do you run a group? How do you help break some of the cycles? And how do you help people change their behavior? And do you believe that they can? Are they effective, these treatment strategies? So read your book, and you'll find all the different answers to those questions. So a typical 24-session anger management group. A lot of people are sent to anger management if they've been involved with the court systems. So how they have to go do 20, this is just a typical structure for the 24 different programs that they have to go to and do the programs work. So they start the group, they talk about making choices, support and confrontation, managing stress, understanding the cycle of violence, the costs to the individuals and to your family and to society, intergenerational issues, feelings, power and control, assertion, alcohol and drug effects, sex. Then they sum up all that they've learned and they talk about their program's success. Overall, batterers report that such programs do help them gain control over their anger, enable them to communicate better with their partners, and reduce their violence. A research group in 1987 found that battered women in approximately 7 out of 10 cases reported that physical and sexual violence stopped after their partners went through an anger management program. When violence did reoccur after the men graduated from these programs, it was almost always remarkably reduced. Relationships were also improved, and many women who had not attended indicated that they had picked up pointers that their partners brought home from the sessions. So there are a lot of good outcomes that take place. Other researchers, though, have found little evidence to indicate the rates of violence by perpetrators who obtained or completed treatment are very different from those who did not. Some more recent studies in the late 2000s of batter prevention programs have indicated less than satisfactory results. Doesn't mean we stop trying to prevent, though, and stop trying to intervene. The issue is really motivation to change and supervision of the batterer. So what they found is that close supervision of a batterer makes a large difference. If they know that they're being watched, they're tending to recidivate, to act out again at lower rates. Are they ready to change? Are they sorry for what they've done? Although most clients who come to a battering program are angry and hostile because they're pressured and required to be there, the majority do report that they learned from and even come to enjoy the camaraderie of the group.